it's Stephanie, and I wanted to talk about some of the books I read in December of last year. I'm going to talk about, I think, 5 or 6 books, and I have a lot of thoughts on these books. Not all of them positive, but a lot of them are positive, don't worry. I feel like I haven't done this in a while, so I'm just going to dive right in. So first up, I'm going to talk about Journey of the Living Dead. This is a tribute to 50 Years of Flesh Eaters by Dr. Arnold T. Blumberg. And this is really chronicling a history of the portrayal of zombies in horror movies over the past 50 years. It doesn't necessarily start with Night of the Living Dead. So that's obviously like a huge, turning point for zombies in horror movies. He really does get into even the Haitian roots and some of their portrayals in silent films before that. I had a lot of interest in how horror movies are kind of our catharsis and our way of dealing with real life horrors, and really looking at what was going on in history at a certain point and how that manifested itself into the horror movies that came out around that time. And zombies have always been really interesting in the way that I feel like they're very malleable to whatever society and people were going through that time. And I was really interested to see why we had a surge of zombie movies in the 2000s. And I mean, obviously, as he points out, we went through a lot in that decade. That decade was 9/11 and a big recession and a lot of other things. And of course, the success of The Walking Dead bringing along a lot of copycats. So the discussion and everything in here was really fascinating to that part of me. I was this is also a good book for cinephiles if you want to know the history of horror movies. I would say the parts I was less interested in was the plot synopses of these movies. Well, in this movie this happens, then this happens, then this happens, then this happens. I was kind of more interested in what was the cultural impact of what was going on. And I definitely got that in here. They were just both in here. So if you are interested in kind of a cultural history of horror and you're a big cinephile and you're especially really into zombies, I would 100% recommend this. This was a lot of fun. I learned a lot. I highlighted a lot of this. And Dr. Blumberg is an expert in the zombie stuff. It definitely shows. So this was really good. If you're interested in this at all, I totally recommend checking that out. And then another book that was sent to me was The Forgotten Island by David Sodergren. This was a lot of fun. This follows 2 sisters who are kind of estranged, and they go on a trip to Thailand, and one of them brings her super douchey boyfriend along. And this book I would say is survival creature horror. I just thought he did a really good job. I've said this a lot, but there's a really delicate balance to writing a good story, and I think it's all on the characters. And it's hard with books like these because you are introducing a lot of characters that are really just fodder for the slaughter. You are getting to know them, kind of developing a baseline personality, and then you're gonna kill them off. I thought he did a really good job at really giving me people that I cared about. I mean, not always, but people that I had opinions about, and people that I was rooting for, and people that I was oh, I definitely hope you go first. So just to really give me feelings about these characters. And I thought he did a really good job at developing the relationship between the 2 sisters with showing, not telling. We see a lot of the way they interact. We see a lot of playfulness in their dialogue that seemed very natural to a sisterly relationship. It wasn't just, this is what they went through, this is what's going on. He definitely took time to develop these characters, which I really liked. I really loved the dialogue. I thought it was genuinely funny, which I think is hard to do. I think it's hard to write dialogue that sounds natural, but is also if I was there, I would have laughed at that joke. So a lot of fun, very creative. I cannot wait to see what he comes out with next. He is on Instagram at Paperbacks and Pugs, and he has the most adorable pug, Boris. So if you are into horror books and cute dogs, go check him out, and obviously read this book. And for a book I unfortunately wasn't a huge fan of, I read The Ravenous by Amy Lucavics. There was a lot more that I wanted from this story, and I felt and this is kind of my complaint with the other book I didn't like, was that I felt there was interesting things presented that were not focused on, and instead we focused on the kind of simple, uninteresting things. Also, like, a little bit of spoilers. If you're really interested in reading this book, maybe just like move it along a few minutes. So in this book, the youngest sister dies, and the mom, who's kind of this like deadbeat addict mom, just takes her away to go to somebody that she knows and like who knows some kind of like voodoo magic, and like brings her back to life. And like, they kind of ask questions, but like, we really don't get into that. Like, what? How? Why? Like, I want to know more about this mom, but it is not about the mom. It is about like these sisters snipping at each other for the whole time in this book. And then also, like, spoiler, like the mom goes and like kills a person to feed her daughter. And the mom is just like a background character. Like, we do not get into like, how did that happen? Like, I kind of wanted a little more about that. I guess if we weren't going to focus on the mom and how this like middle-class white woman has these like really shady connections and like knows people that know legitimate magic, we focus instead on these sisters, like I said, bickering with each other and kind of like dealing with this secret and this sister that has this issue, and like, what are they gonna do? I thought before I picked this up, it might have like a virgin suicides kind of feel to it, which I think the author also tried to do, because at one point one of the characters is watching the virgin suicides. Unfortunately, it didn't work out for me. I didn't care for the ending. I thought there was a couple plot holes and a couple of ways that things could have been handled, and it just unfortunately didn't work for me. There are other books from this author that I do want to check out, but unfortunately this one was just... Another book that was sent to me for review was a deep horror that was very nearly awe by J.R. Hamantaschen, and this was a short story collection. I'm pretty sure the title is a reference to Pet Sematary, and I say this because I was very recently listening to the audiobook narrated by Michael C. Hall, and spoilers for Pet Sematary, I guess. But in the scene where Louis Creed is like digging up Gage in like Gage's grave, which so far is like my favorite scene in that whole book. He like looks at him and he says like, you know, he was overcome with a deep horror that was very nearly awe. And I was like, hey, like that short story collection that I'm reading. So I'm assuming that's what it's in reference to. This was very good. These stories like ran the gambit of like all kinds of horror, like supernatural horror, aliens, mind readers, true crime. I mean, like most short story collections, I liked some more than others. Here are my favorite ones. No One Cares, But I Tried, 7099 Brecksville Road, Independence, Ohio, and Upon a Path Suddenly Irradiated. Upon a Path Suddenly Irradiated at Some Halfway Point Between the Day Beams As Rich as Hers. That is one title for one story, and I think I mispronounced one of the words because I don't know how to pronounce it. These were really fun. A lot of them I thought were a little too long for my taste, but they were interesting, and I think he does spend a lot of time developing characters, and he's a very talented writer. So the one of the stories that I mentioned is about like a girl that works in a corporate environment, and she starts hearing these like awful thoughts about herself and thinking that they are not coming from her, and it takes a turn for the dark. And I think he also did a really good job of experimenting with like different levels of tones. I think sometimes when you read, especially a short story collection from one author, usually you can tell like they have like a soft, like weird, dreamy kind of thing, or they're all like very hard hitting. And I think this one, there was a lot of variety with like, you know, this one is more contemplative, and this one is really gonna punch you in the gut, and this one is kind of like old school pulpy horror. And I think there definitely was a good variety in that. A lot of this does lean into the more like weirder side of horror for me, but I really enjoyed this, and he is a really good writer. And I think I read that he's working currently on a novel, and he does have like I think 2 other short story collections other than this, so I definitely suggest checking him out. That is J.R. Hamantaschen. A book that I have kind of complicated feelings on is Sawkill Girls by Claire Legrand, and this was a really buzzy YA horror book that came out last year. It's about this girl, Marion, and her young sister. Their dad has just died, and so they move onto this island, Sawkill Island, and their mom takes up a housekeeping job. And the family that she is working for, their daughter is named Val, and she's kind of like the queen bee of this island. But you find out that like Val and her mother and her grandmother for generations have been in cahoots with this ancient demon on the island and have been sacrificing girls to him for generations. And so like girls are constantly going missing on this island and no one is really doing anything about it. And it's a lot like It in that way. There's also like a character named Zoe, and like her best friend was the last girl to go missing. So she is very involved. She thinks like there's something going on. And when Marion and her family move, her younger sister starts to become really close with Val. And this was a very like overtly feminist work, and I was here for a lot of it. Unfortunately for me, I thought there was a lot of missed opportunities. Like the fact that Val and generations of women in her family have really succumbed to a system that hurts other women. And I think really getting into like women that can compartmentalize that or write that off as, I mean, in this case, it was like for self-preservation, like they will never get hurt and they will be successful if they do this. But I wanted her to maybe dig into that a little more. Also, there is a character who is like 100% okay with all of this stuff happening to girls and is actually kind of a part of a group that is going to do bad stuff to girls until like someone very close to him is picked, and all of a sudden he has a moral crisis where he realizes like this is a bad thing, and that's just never really questioned. It's just you as a reader are like, well, he's a good guy now, he had an epiphany. And I just want to dig into like more of that, like how people can be okay with certain things until it, you know, hits them where they live, and all of a sudden they're like, well, this is a crisis. I just thought there was some really good complex issues we could have gotten into. Like I said, like women that are fine with supporting things or supporting systems that, you know, hurt other women, and people not caring about issues until it affects them directly. So I don't know, I had some issues with it. I think if you're looking for a just like, if in this time you need like a I am woman, hear me roar, like emotional type of story, this is really good for that. It's got that like really good like feminist rage. Unfortunately for me, I don't know, I just like, it didn't work. Like those things bothered me. I'm just like, I want more of like these little things that I think should have been the focus, but you know, I'm not the author. And I think like the tone of the story kind of changed a little bit. Like there was definitely some points where it was like creepy, and then it kind of went into like weird fantasy, fabulism, magical realism, and I kind of thought it was a little all over the place. But I mean, it definitely had its good points. Like when it was creepy, I thought it was creepy. I thought it had like really good imagery and a really good buildup of dread when it needed to have it, and it had really good diversity. There is like a lesbian relationship and there is an asexual black character. I just felt like I wanted a little more depth into the other things. And the last book that I was kind of disappointed in was The Last Time I Lied by Riley Sager. And I don't know if this is as much of a condemnation on him as a writer and more on the whole setup of the thriller genre. I just really feel like it overpromises and underdelivers, and a lot of that I think is really the way the genre is and the way that they write for it to be just a readable, can't put down type of story, is that they put these cliffhangers at the end of chapters, so you have to keep going. You have to find out what happens. Like, what could that cryptic line mean? And I don't feel like it pays off a lot. For example, like a scene where like two people are talking and then, you know, the character's inner monologue is like, well, I wonder if he would still feel that way about me if he knew I was the reason she was dead. And then when it gets to the resolution, it's like a very, like that is A to Z. Like her involvement in that person dying was not enough for her to be taking credit for that person dying. And I felt like that was the case here, where like things were led a certain way. I just didn't buy it. Everything was, I think, explained away too easily. And in this like crazy ride that I went through and all these things that we were like led to believe kind of actually ended up being nothing. was disappointing to me. And I know a lot of people really enjoyed this book, and it just didn't work for me. And I really liked Final Girls, and that's maybe more because that played with elements of the horror genre and kind of twisted those. And this was, I feel like, 100% firmly in the thriller camp. And unfortunately, it did those things I don't like about thrillers. See, when you read a horror book and it says things like that, like, I'm the reason that she's dead, guess what? That means they probably killed them with their own two hands, or like literally fed them to a monster. Not like, I said a mean thing and she went outside and got hit by a truck, so I'm the reason that she's dead. It's just too much of a jump for me. I don't know. I just don't care. I keep picking up thrillers and I keep being disappointed by them. But anyway, sorry to be like a negative Nancy here, but those were some of the books I read in December. Let me know if you have any opinions on the books that I read. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you again soon. Bye!